is AkeFest 2021 online. My name is Kinna Likimani, and I welcome you to my book chat with the author Peace Adzo Medie. We'll be discussing the book, her first book, her debut book, His Only Wife. So welcome. Peace.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Kinna.
How are you?
I'm good.
I'll be a little bit familiar because we have so many friends in common, but we've never met, have we?
No, I don't think
We
so.
haven't met. So I'm grateful to Lola and the Ake team for bringing us together sooner rather than later. So welcome to the book chat.
Thank you.
Let me first gush a bit. I enjoyed the book. It's what people would say a fast, entertaining read. Like I picked it up, and by the time I was putting it down, I was done. Like I just read it all. And the first thing I want to ask you is, if I want to tell you something, about a year ago, I went to my cousin's traditional ceremony, and the groom was not there. It was the same as what you had done. So give us a little bit background about this type of traditional ceremony, because it was my first time. Not at a traditional ceremony, but at a ceremony where they put the picture of the groom there, and he was represented by a male sibling. So tell us, how common is this in Ghana? Tell us a bit about it.
Yeah. So I'm thrilled to be having this conversation. So that's a good question. So I don't know how common it is, but I know it happens. And my understanding is that it tends to happen when the groom is, usually far away. And for some reason, because of visas and correct papers, or maybe in health, he doesn't show up to his own wedding. But also, interestingly, there are times when both the bride and the groom are not there. So I've also heard of instances where the man is not there, the woman is not there, and they are both represented by relatives. So it happens. It happens. As to how common it is, I don't know, but I know that it happens.
My first encounter with this was actually when I lived in New York for over a decade, and I used to get my hair braided in Harlem. And where the women braided the hair, the top that was a first floor. The second floor was a mobile. It was like the beginning of the mobile phone industry. People would come and buy like cards to call home. And there was this young man there from Senegal, and he was on the phone with his parents arguing. They were in fact, they were marrying him in absentia to a woman he hadn't chosen, that they had chosen. And he was adamant he didn't want it to happen, but it was happening. This is basically how you introduce the book to the story to us. Afi, our very brave heroine, is getting married to a man in absentia. He apparently doesn't want it. I mean, it's not clear that, in fact, we know he's been coerced into it, and she is also being coerced into it. So let's talk a little bit about that, because when I use the word coercion on Afi's side, I don't mean it particularly in a negative way. It's a complicated story. So tell us a bit about why you framed it this way, and Afi's overwhelming obligation to her mother and her family.
Yeah, so Afi is definitely encouraged, maybe not so gently encouraged, to marry Ellie. And I wrote it in this way because I really wanted to explore the themes of obligation towards family and the expectations that family placed on us. And I think what better way to explore it than looking at how families interfere in matters of the heart, or sometimes the heart is not even there, just relationships. And so I really wanted to get at it. And most of the book is really just Afi struggling with the things that her family is asking her to do and the demands that are being placed on her. And the fact that in some way, she's a very good Ghanaian girl. So she wants to please her family. She wants to especially please her mother. And I really wanted to get at this. And it partly came from my own research. So I do work mainly on violence against women. And I did interviews with survivors in Liberia, in Cote d'Ivoire, And one of the things that kept coming up in the interviews were women who say, "Oh, I wanted to leave that relationship, but my mother said, my friend said, my uncle said." And it just really got me thinking about how people end up in relationships because of relatives and other people who are close to them, and how they
Yeah.
stay in those relationships because of the
Mm.
expectations of these people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so this arranged marriage was really a good way to explore that.
And thank you for bringing that out, because there's so much pressure for people to conform to what they are, for women especially. But also in this case, there's Ellie, the rich young
Mhm.
man, to
Mhm.
conform to what their parents want in ways that even don't feel right, to even, like, the family having to constantly give her encouragement and props and shoo her into it and tell her it was going to be okay. I think that you did a really good job. I call it a romance because I also see this as Afi's road to her own, to appreciating herself, upholding herself, and loving herself enough to resolve a certain situation for herself. So, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Ellie is a big part of the story, but in reality, this is Afi's path
Yeah,
towards independence and the realization that she has to stand up for herself. That is really what the book is about.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's very much a feminist novel. So I don't think Afi would describe herself as a feminist. The word feminist does not ever come up in the novel. And I did that, I meant it that way because I said, look, one of the things what I was doing, thinking when I was writing was, this, you're not writing about yourself, you're writing about somebody else. And I always do that when I write fiction, just so that I don't make a mistake of putting too much of myself into the character, so that the character starts sounding like me and making the choices I would make. And so I thought, a young woman in Afi's situation, is she likely going to be thinking about feminism and about different theories and concepts and thinkers? Probably not. But she would definitely know that she's being treated unfairly. She would definitely know that she wants better for herself. And even though she might never use that word feminism, she's very much a feminist.
yes,
And so I
yes,
wanted to
yes.
write a book that dealt with these very important themes, but in very subtle ways, but also in ways that are true to the character. And this is not saying that a young woman growing up in Bowo is not going to be talking about feminism. But I just thought that a woman in Afi's situation, it was the chances that she would be spending all this time thinking about feminism and how she needs to liberate herself, she would likely not be thinking in those terms, although that is what she would be thinking about
Mm-hmm,
while not
mm-hmm,
using that vocabulary. And so
mm-hmm.
I just really wanted to get at that in the book.
Let's talk a bit about Ellie. Again, I'm not giving anything away. It says very clearly in the book, the blurb, that Ellie is a wealthy businessman from a wealthy family. His mother has been Afi and her mother's benefactor. The mother actually works for Ellie's mother, and this whole idea is dreamed up because the family does not like the woman that Ellie is with at the moment, and they want to see, basically they want to manipulate the situation. Again, there is this sense that we have, as feminists, but also as people living in a society where men have more freedom than women. I like how you still very much place at the center of Ellie's life the familial obligation to his mother and his inability to go against his family, and assert what he really wants. So they are both struggling with that particular the familial obligation. This whole idea that you can't, of course, you can't marry without your family's blessing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that we know for a fact that young women are under so much pressure. And there are
Yes.
all these demands placed on young women to conform and to be good women and to be respectful. I've spoken quite a bit about how, in Ghana, respectful is used, and it's always with, especially with young women, to be respectful. And you don't have the similar demands of respect being
Men.
placed on men or asking them to
Yeah.
be as respectful.
Yeah.
So we do know that young women especially face these challenges, but I think the fact is that men are also under a great deal of pressure. And I think it became clear to me when I would have conversations, including with my students at Legon, about the expectations that were placed on men. The idea that you should also get married to a certain kind of woman, and you should provide these ideas about masculinity. And so you should provide for the woman, and you should be a kind of man and have a certain status. And the fact is that, especially with the current global economic situation in which we find ourselves, which trickles down to people, in small towns and villages across Africa. Most men are not able to live up to those standards. Just as we see the patriarchy and ideas about what it means to be a man being oppressive, many of these ideas being oppressive to women, we find that they can also be harmful to men.
Men.
And I really wanted to get at that in this novel. So I mean, I could say maybe women have it harder, but men are also not there.
Yeah. Of course, we know that it's the patriarchy she's functioning under. All these women. You highlighted different levels of womanhood and different ways in which women sort of live their lives within the patriarchy and carve out a space for themselves. So there is Afi herself, and we've discussed Afi. There is Ellie's mother, who is a very rich businesswoman, mother of three boys, three sons, quite successful businesswoman. They never, I don't remember what they said about Ellie's dad, but she not appears, she is the mover and shaker definitely on her family side because of her wealth and her business
Mhm.
acumen. So there's her. There's Afi's mother, who is what I will call what happens to the stereotypical widow, who had very much married an educated man, a man more educated than herself, who was going to look after her and died, and then they fell on hard times, she and her daughter. So there's Afi's mother. There's Afi's best friend, Mawuse, who is planning her own life. She hopes to get married to her long-term boyfriend, but she definitely is going to university. She has a more what we call, I hate the word informal sector, but anyway, she has a more, you can see she's planning a role for herself more in the formal way as a professional. And then there's Evelyn. In Ghana, we'll call her Afi's sister-in-law because they both are dating the brothers. So there's Evelyn, and Evelyn's whole approach to being in a relationship with a man who might marry someone else. And there is Sarah, the dressmaker. You, in a very short, and the book is not like a big book. I think might be 250 pages. Yeah, 262. Tell us how you did that. Give us a nice, diverse body of women,
Mm.
and exploring how different women are living different lives under
Mhm.
this system we find ourselves in. Yeah.
It all happened quite naturally. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it comes from a place of writing about things that are familiar with me or
Mm-hmm.
familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so just the fact is that living in Ghana, I just encounter so many different types of women.
Women.
And something that also happens when I write. So often I plot my writing, but like clockwork, it never goes as planned. And then characters, take on a life of their own and do what they want and defy me. But often
Mm-hmm.
when I'm writing, I don't, sorry, when I'm planning, there are a lot of minor characters that I don't even plan for, and they just naturally, organically emerge. So somebody like Sarah, who is Afi's, I would say her boss, who's teaching her how to
Yeah.
sew. It's not a character that I sat down and thought there's going to be this person who will be important in this way. No.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as the story progresses, I think just from my own experiences, I'm like, there's a need for someone like this in this space, and then the person just, I guess I shouldn't say appeared. I write them up. So, and I think that just comes from what I've lived and what I've seen. being in Ghana and just writing about things that are very familiar. And something that's important is that these women, whether or not they are supportive, even Muna, who is the other woman, they all play a very important role in that they push Afi forward and they force Afi to grow. So whether they are telling her sensible things or like Evelyn, or she's being pressured by them, like in the case of Auntie. At the end of the day,
Yes.
whatever she's receiving from them is forcing her to change, is forcing her to think in new ways, and is forcing her to grow as a person. And I
Yes.
think that
Yes.
is just the reality of life, that we encounter people, and whether for good or for bad, they have an impact on us in some way. And for me, I wanted the people, whatever they did, to force Afi to really think about the situation and to,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
take steps to address the situation in which she found herself.
This business of underestimating women because you think they are younger, because you think they are undereducated, because you think they are naive, because you have more power than them. And just now we are talking about, the growth, right? I mean, I'm not somebody who follows royalty because of the empire. But this has a little bit of like Princess Diana in it. You know what I mean? Somebody completely underestimated and is supposed to be pushed around the chessboard. But I love the fact that it was unique to Afi. It made sense. What you wrote made sense and stay true to the character's growth, the arc of the character. Do you see what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Being that this is your first book and this is your first writing that I've read, how did you learn to do this? Were there influences like, because it's great character development?
I think it just comes from a lifetime of reading.
So who do you read?
Oh my goodness, who don't? And as you say, I don't read as much as I used to. I read everything, and increasingly
Mhm.
now I'm reading more Ghanaian writers, more African writers. When I was younger, I don't know how it was for you, but we're only getting American and European books. So I
Mhm.
grew
Mhm.
up on American stories and European stories, and it wasn't
Mhm.
until
Mhm.
I became an adult that I was like, I'm going to seek out books by African
The
authors and
writers.
and, and read them. And so it's, gosh, who haven't I read? All of the greats. Achebe, I'm actually reading, it's right in front of me now, Bucci. And every time
Emma
I
Cheta.
hope I'm not mispronouncing it, Emechetas,
Emma
the
Cheta.
Black.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's
Yes.
reminding me quite a bit in a different way of Afi's experience. I mean, I adore Nervous Conditions. I've read that
Yes.
book multiple times. I recently, another book on my table I'm looking at is Our Sister Killjoy, Ama
Killjoy.
Tayedu.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
I love all of these books, and I think so. When I think about how did I learn to write in this way, I really think that reading makes you a good writer, or
Mhm.
at least you
Mhm.
pick up some skills just
Mhm.
reading a
Mhm.
lot. And
Mhm.
so I read all these great classics, but I also spent a lot of time reading like Mills and Bones romances
Mhm.
because they
Mhm.
were
Mhm.
everywhere in Ghana.
Mhm.
And I read all of the like murder mysteries, the John Grishams. I read all of the Daniel Steele's. So yeah, I have read widely, and I think some of that must have contributed to how I write now in
Mhm.
um
Mhm.
in one way or the other. But in telling Afi's story this way and in this journey, and I think partly my academic training and research also comes into play, because I said I just want to show the reader what many women go through, or at least what some women go through. And I think reading a few story, it can even be frustrating for some people because you are like, can this woman just go forward in life? Because if you notice, Afi goes forward 2 steps and she takes 1 step back.
The back. Yes.
And her
Yes.
journey is just so convoluted.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I've come to realize in my own research, in all of the work I do as a feminist, my readings, my conversations, people rarely just automatically arrive at a place of realization, of empowerment. Okay, I actually don't also like that word, of realization, of independence. It rarely happens. For a lot of people, it is a process. And I feel that in that process, there's so much that we can learn. And in that process is life and its beauty and its joy and its pain. And I want to get at the process, and especially in this book, that's what I wanted to.
I love when I read a new writer, you're a new writer, and I can place what you have written firmly in the pantheon of African women writers. Some particular stories, I call them the stories that we've painted the walls of our house with, some issues. Some of it is one very popular one writers are always interrogating is the issue of infertility and abuse from society. But the other one is polygamy. But not only just polygamy, it just never seems to go away. This thing where men cheat, they are serial cheaters, they cheat all the time. And even among a younger generation of men, this doesn't seem to ever go away. And so it's something that you also find African women writers coming back to about the issue of love, relationships, and freedom and happiness within this relationship framework that patriarchy in our cultures forces us to women to deal with, and they can't escape from. So talk a little bit about that.
If we want to understand the situation of women in any society, including in African societies, we need to first look at what is happening within the home, within the most private of spaces. If we want to understand why Ghana has never had a woman president, like the first place to start is what happens within the home and what conversations are parents having with their daughters, and how are men treating their wives, and how are women reacting to the treatment that they receive, whether it is cheating or not being number one when it comes to being a wife. And so I think that is why we see these stories over and over. And I think my fear is that in many quarters the importance of these stories are not recognized, and the political elements. And I think it's all about what we even think of as politics, but the political element of it is not recognized. But I think if we want to understand everything that happens in our societies, we want to understand how our government looks the way that it does and why it performs the way that it does, we need to ask questions about what is it that we tell men about what it means to be a man, about what it means to be a husband, and what it means to treat your wife and children. And once we begin asking those questions, we can begin to trace direct lines from things that happen within the home to what happens in the highest offices of the land. So I think that is why, and I think a lot of African women writers recognize the importance of the personal, and what happens within the home, in what is the so-called private sphere, although it's anywhere really private at this point. And that is why these themes keep recurring in fiction.
There are lots of women who overcome, lead their own paths to their independence in any African environment. Because of the patriarchy, the overarching narrative. And when a young woman picks up this book, what is it that you hope they take out of it? For their own sense of how to navigate this culture we are in.
Yeah. So I should confess that when I wrote the book, I had all these ideas about how I wanted people to receive what I wanted people to get out of the book. And now I'm more like, okay, people can take out whatever they take out. But when it comes to especially Ghanaian women, young Ghanaian women reading this book, something that was important for me was that people should see that following the rules, being respectful, is not always the best path to take. I've joked about it and said that I want to encourage women to be disrespectful. But on a serious note, though, I want there to be many images of women who stand up for themselves and try to live life on their own terms. And the fact is that there are so many women like that. And I'm not even talking like highly educated women. I'm not talking freedom fighters and leaders and women presidents and all of that. I'm talking about regular women living their everyday lives, I was raised by a grandmother who never entered a classroom, but was one of the most amazing women that I've ever met, and in many ways stood up to society. And it's so I just want more of those stories to be out there. And I'm not under any illusion that somebody is going to read my book and then immediately they'll become a new person. But I just think that just seeing these stories, whether it's in books, it's poetry, it's a film, just seeing these things over and over again, women behaving in this way will just show young women and girls that it's natural, and that it is acceptable and it is good to be able to stand up for yourself and to make decisions. Often when we tell young women to be respectful, what we are really asking them is to do things that are not good for them but are good for other people. I'm hoping that people will read this book and say, maybe I should do things that are good for me, for myself, and not always put these societal expectations first, expectations that end up harming me in the long term. So that's what I hope people would take out of it, especially young women reading this book in Ghana.
So Afi is like the most naive, the person that they all want to move across the chessboard. Meanwhile, there are other, as I've outlined, other women who have power. There is her sister-in-law, her Ellie's brother Fred, his wife Cecilia, is thinking about a run for parliament. They seem to have a very equal relationship. And then, of course, there's Ellie's own mother. The other, because this is the other thing that you captured, how very easy it is also for women of power in patriarchy to sacrifice the young women. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not only sacrificing the young women, but it's sacrificing the people who don't have power and
Power,
resources,
exactly.
right? And I think Yaya is a great example. Yaya is Ellie's
Yes,
younger sister, and she is
yes,
loyal to Afi until she's not loyal to Afi.
no,
And
yeah,
Yaya is definitely about protecting the patriarchy. Why? Because she benefits from it,
yes,
right? And
yes.
so I just really wanted to look at women in all of these roles, because it's true that there's not necessarily, I mean, the truth is a lot of women support each other, but also a lot of women do not support other women. And this is something that I thought it was important to illustrate in the book.
How entertaining the book is. Because a piece of work, a piece of writing must first make us happy to have read the story. It must first entertain us. And so you do that very well in telling her story. But I could also tell, you mentioned when I was talking about your influences, you mentioned Mills and Boone. So I could very much identify the romance trope, She is the young, inexperienced person, and he is obviously very dashing, very handsome, very dark, does everything right, dresses well. So it's not very hard for all of us, in fact, to fall in love with Ellie. So talk a bit about the romance aspects of the romance genre in it. Although I've said this is very much a romance, it's Afi's romance with herself, but there is that part of it as well, the relationship and how she so is obviously blown away. Basically, it's like he carries her off her feet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love love. I'm I'm a big fan of love. And look, I've I've accepted that these romance novels, that most of them, at least the ones I read, were not feminist romance novels, and they do give you sometimes very harmful notions of what it means to be in a relationship and what is acceptable and what isn't. But I still remain a massive fan of love. So of course I found an opportunity to squeeze it into this book. I was like, let me sprinkle in a bit of romance and have fun with it. And so that is why all the years of reading romance novels, it eventually impacted on my writing, even when I didn't plan to write a romance novel. And I definitely don't think of it as a romance novel. Although, as you say, maybe romance between Afi and herself, definitely yes, but not so much between her and Ellie. It was a great deal of fun to write. The awkwardness and trying to get to know someone quickly and trying to make them happy. It was so fun to write about those things. I definitely enjoyed writing them. And also something that I wanted to write about was female desire. I definitely don't see enough of it. And not so much that women not expressing desire, but really looking at how complicated it is, especially in settings where women are supposed to pretend like they don't have these desires. So that was another fun part to write. Afi trying to hide her feelings and her desires. And so just writing about sexuality was also something that I thought was important, but it was also fun to do.
The desire part of it I thought was fantastic because she wanted him. She fell in love with him. She wanted his touch. She wanted to be held. She wanted the tenderness.
Hmm.
And of course, my irritation, sometimes my irritation with her, when she would, of course, I am understandably cry over Muna, the other woman. Sometimes I'll be in my head like, but she was there before you. But of course, once you fall in love with somebody, it doesn't matter how many people were there before you, right? You want that person. So in that sense, and she wanted definitely she wanted the obligation, the duty owed her from him because she was his wife, recognized traditional marriage. They'd been married. So I thought that vein of she wants the desire, she's falling in love with them, was so refreshing because it again wasn't what I expected from how we began with Afi. Again, you bring that out, and that she's not just this person to be moved across a chessboard according to what people want, but that she's sensual and she wants to be loved and she wants to please in that love. Yeah. So you did a very, very good job with that one. Thank you very much. I genuinely believe that he falls in love with her, except he's in love with someone else also. And he wants all his cake and he wants to eat all the cakes he can have while being in love. Talk a bit about that with Ellie.
I mean, I think so. Ellie is, in some ways, he's sweet, but in some ways, I think he's a very selfish character. This is a man who's been able to get everything he wants in life. Uh, he's accumulated all this wealth, and so to tell him that no, he cannot have all the women he chooses, to him that's just unacceptable. Why can he not just have every woman that he wants? And so that's the tension in the character, and I really wanted that there to be that tension, because I feel like if Ellie was like Uncle Pius, for example, a rich version of Uncle Pius, but I mean, as soon as you encountered him, you would have been like, Afi, um, forget about this man and move on. But I didn't want it to be as simple as that. I wanted the reader to at least pause and say, maybe Afi should stay. Maybe Afi should try and make it work. Maybe them falling in love is not a terrible thing. And yeah, so I really wanted to kind of underline the tension within this relationship. But also the fact is, Ellie was I shouldn't say typical, I shouldn't generalize, but definitely a man who has everything and believes that he should have everything that he wants. And when Afi confronts him, he cannot even understand why she's not happy with what he's given her.
Now let's come to you as a writer. Did you always want to write fiction?
I've been writing fiction since I was, I don't know, like 9, 10, and not because I wanted to write fiction, but because I read so much, I ran out of books. I grew up in Ho, and as a kid, I'd go to the library, and we there were so few books. I remember I would have to, like, I had this strategy of hanging around. Now that I think about it, I look very shifty, hanging around outside the library and hoping that someone would return a book that I hadn't yet read, because once the book goes inside the library, there are a bunch of kids waiting to borrow it. So the strategy was to wait and meet the person on the road to the library, and then come to an agreement with them. You would take you would take their book and you give them the one that you have. So I've well, not that I've always wanted to write, but because of that, I got into writing, because I just never had enough books, despite all of my schemes at the library and all the books my parents bought. They could not keep up with my reading. So that is how I got into writing. To be honest with you, I never considered it as a career. Um, and I think maybe I shouldn't blame the Ghana educational system, but I think it's what is the things that we are taught to aspire to, and the things that we are taught to think of as careers. So I really never thought of writing as a career, but I just always knew that I would write. And I wrote all the way until I was in my undergrad, and then when I went to grad school, I couldn't keep up because there just wasn't enough time to write fiction in addition to everything else. So I actually stopped writing until the last year of my PhD. That's when I started writing the novel. I don't know it's as if grad school just shut off my fiction writing, and even reading. I didn't read much fiction in grad school for I don't know how many years of grad school, 6 years. And then like the final year, as I was finishing up my dissertation, I just started writing again, and I just started reading so much fiction again. And I think it was partly because the workload began to reduce, because being in grad school, I used to go to the library with a suitcase because that's the only way I could get books in and out of the library. I borrowed just so many school books. So there was no time to squeeze in fiction for the most part. So a very long answer in saying that I always knew that I would write. I just didn't know that I would be a published writer. Like I hoped, and I knew I would work towards it, but I didn't know if or when it would happen, I think.
Well, great answer. And I like the fact that, in fact, I love the fact that you mentioned reading as a young person, because one of the things that also struck me about the book is that it fits very well into the young adult genre space. Did you think about that? Did you want to write a book that young adults could read? Did you think about the audience who would be reading this at all?
Absolutely. So I definitely wanted young girls especially to read it, and teenage girls to read it, because I mean by the time I was 13, I was 12, 13, I was reading books for adults. So for me it wasn't it just seemed natural. I very much wanted want teenage girls, young women to read it because of the story, because of I'm hesitant to say the message, but because of what it conveys. Actually, just 2 weeks ago, I was in Ho, and I went to my secondary school, Ola Secondary School, and donated copies of the book to the school's library. And I also went to the whole public library to donate copies of the book. And I mean, my dream is that like tons of young women would read it, and I don't know, Afi's story would be one that they're all familiar with and would spark a bit of rebellion in someone.
We need so many books for young adults. The pleasure and the joy of reading Afi's story from Ho. I love Ho, by the way.
Thank
And
you.
heck, yeah, very, very nice, very beautiful place.
Yes.
Afi's from Ho, and she comes to Accra, and even seeing, there's something about when you are young and you are seeing your life or some possibility of your life, your environment being reflected on a page in a book that is so relatable and easy to read. You see, so I definitely think that if that was your mission, you achieved it perfectly. You've done that. You've done that well. We thank you. Yeah,
Thank
you've done
you.
that
Thank
well.
you. Yeah, that point about seeing you, because despite all the reading I did, I have no memory of reading a book in which anyone even had my name or the name of people I knew, like came from the place I came from places that were familiar to me. So it's like I spent a huge part of my life reading books in which I didn't even see myself. And one of the reasons I started writing this book, and I didn't realize it initially, but it was just because I wanted books that reflected um, things that were familiar to me, my reality. And so if even as an adult I crave that, imagine what children crave and imagine what young adults crave. Like I don't read children's books anymore, but I'm a massive fan of people who write children's book, of people who illustrate children's books, and are ensuring that black kids are seeing other black children in books, they're seeing themselves. It is so very important. And I'm just I wish that growing up we had all of that, but at least it's good that the children now, there are stories with children of all colors, and that you are reading a book and that you're seeing yourself. There's definitely room for many, many, many more such books. My dream is that we're going to see tons of books written about Ho and Kumasi and Tamale and Lagos. And let's just see all these books. Let us have a variety and so much to choose from. Because as even though I'm a writer, I'm also very much a reader. And I tell you, if somebody wrote a book that was set in Ho, I would jump on it because I would want to read it, because I'm first a reader before I'm even a writer.
I don't mean to disaccra, but let me disaccra. I always say that, we all live, for those of us who, and I feel really bad for Ghans, because I'm like, nobody, no group in Ghana should have the misfortune of having a capital city sited on their lands, you see. Because that creates a certain kind of pressure, environmental pressure, land pressure on the people. But I believe that one of the reasons we should absolutely develop is so that we could all live in different regional capitals. And definitely, you pick this up in the book. There is a certain familiarity and, I would say, adoration of how Ho comes across. The opening scenes of the book is set in Ho, of course, and you can almost feel a certain pitch or tone of alienation when she moves to Accra, because Accra is so overwhelming. And where are the neighborhoods in Accra? I don't know. It's like everything is so urban. And so I really appreciated that sort of loving focus and regional, like regional capital specific. I'm being kind of Ghanaian here, but I'm sure other Africans can relate that it's not all the time that the major stories of our lives in books should be in, on one hand, it's either in the village or it's in the urban areas. We are talking about urban towns, regional capitals, more like smaller cities, and I really appreciated that. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah.
You've done Ho proud. You have.
You don't know how pleased I am that you just said that.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
a lot of my writing about Ho comes from a place of almost sadness and nostalgia
Mhm,
for what it was, because I grew up in Ho, for what it was, and I go back now and it's changed. And many of the people I knew, I loved, have passed away. People have migrated. I was
yeah.
home just 2 weeks ago and I was complaining about how our family house is empty.
Yes.
Growing up,
Yeah.
like you wake up at 5 in the morning, by 4 o'clock in the
Yeah.
morning,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
activity.
Yeah.
And now,
Yeah.
you go there midday and there's no one. There are like two kids living, there are two children in the house now. And like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness,
Yeah.
I miss
Yeah.
what we
Yeah.
had. And so my
Yeah.
writing about Ho is really comes from that place of almost loss and change that I'm struggling to deal with. I'm
Yeah.
really trying to
Yeah.
reconcile it in my mind. And I don't know, maybe I'll always write about Ho because I'm working on my second novel. And oh yes, it is once again in Ho. And I don't know, I don't know. For now, every story I think about, there's somehow a whole element to it. And maybe that will change over time. But for now, my love for my hometown is really resonating in my books.
There's always this kind of like life we lost,
Mm-hmm.
having always under this pressure of migrating, because our leaders suck. So anyway, thank you very, very much for that. Do you want to share anything else that you're writing with us? What anything you want us to say we should look forward to, or are you just basking in the huge success of His Only Wife? Because it's been picked by, I've noticed that it's been picked by some reading groups across the world, and congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, the
You're
book has
welcome.
been so much love. I've had so many conversations with people so far away from me, in I was going to say distant lands, but like that sounds like some olden time person. Um, are reading this book and are discussing it. People who are not Ghanaians, people who are not Africans. But also one of my favorite things is hearing from Ghanaians who are like, "Oh my goodness, I love this book. This is the first time reading a book set here, a book in which I see someone who has my name." And those things are just so fulfilling. So I'm so grateful to everyone who has just been so kind and gone out of their way to tell me what they feel about the book, even when it's criticisms. I appreciate that as well. But I'm working now on my second novel, set partly in Ho, partly in the US, partly in Accra, and it's a novel about friendship. And it's a story of two cousins who grew up together in Ho, and over time they separate, and there's this huge wall between them. And the book is really trying to understand why this wall exists and what it is that has kept them apart. So it's a book about friendship between women, and it's something I kind of explore in His Only Wife, but I do so it's kind of at the center of this novel.
Yes, yes, yes. You do explore that between Afi and Mausa. Well, we will look forward to that. No pressure. Take your time, obviously. But the sooner the better. Yeah, yeah, the sooner the better. But you've done really, really well. Did you find it easy getting an agent, having editors, the whole talk a bit about your experience of the publishing environment?
So yes, I was writing the book and I knew I wanted to get it published. And I remember going to Google and Googling how do you get published? Because I didn't know where to start. And one of the things I read was, well, you have to have an agent. And if you just randomly send your work to an agent, it's likely to end up in the slush pile and they will not read it. And you have to have a full manuscript before you send to an agent. And you have to have connections and people who will introduce you. And I had no connections. So that was a bit discouraging. But something else that I also saw on the internet was that if you publish short stories, sometimes agents will read short stories and they'll reach out to you. So I was working on the novel. I did not send it out to any agent because I think I was almost paralyzed by all of the information I got from Google. But at the same time, I was publishing short stories. So about 3 years after I published one of my stories, my agents read it and reached out to me, and I thought it was a scam actually, but it wasn't. And she reached out to me. My agent is also an editor, so we worked on the manuscript, sent it out, and fortunately, Gone Queen picked it up. I enjoyed working with Chuck, my editor at Gone Queen. I think they really understood what I wanted to do with the book, and they basically allowed me to write the story that I wanted to write.
You did your research and you sort of like I love short stories so much that the idea that there are some kind of pathway to somebody's big novel always upsets me. But the idea that you want people to see your work in magazines, in spaces, so that they, when they know if someone mentioned you to them, they could go and find out that something of yours would be in the public domain. So we wish you the best. Is there anything you want to ask or say before we wrap up?
No, just like thank you, Kina. Thank you. I mean, thank you for
No,
this. I've so enjoyed this conversation. I wish we were
you're
doing this in
welcome.
person. I hope next time.
I know it's
I
the
mean, it will be,
pandemic. Otherwise, we'll be at Ake.
yes, it
Well,
will
we
be
are at Ake
good.
online, but we'll physically, yeah.
Yes,
Which is,
yes,
by the way, let me recommend. Anytime we can do physical meetings. It is Lola, Shanae, and the Ake team. They put on a fantastic festival for African writers. I do not know of any space. I mean, the festivals on the continent, this being one of them, give such validation and love to the writers that, look, when we go physical again, and even if you are not on the program, just attend to feel the love, because it's important.
yes.
It's important to see readers and their reactions and to hang out with your fellow writers. It's really, it's fantastic. It's just wonderful. So
I
we
agree.
hope that we'll be doing physical soon. So I want
Yes.
to thank you First of all, let me tell everybody who is listening, watching us, that this is a fantastic book, and it's an entertaining read, and Peace has done a wonderful job. Wherever you are in the world, like we're saying, you should find something in this book to love and like and challenge you and enjoy, but mostly enjoy, because books are not about social issues. Fiction is about stories. So I want to congratulate Peace on your debut novel. You've done a fantastic job. And thanks to Ake, to Lola and the crew for enabling this conversation. For Lola for asking me who I wanted to talk to. When I said it was Peace, we said, okay. So we've had a great time. So thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Let me introduce a new wave, we change the rules. A new app that you can use. Wanna change your life, then choose. Save money and invest. Pay bills when you decide. Safe and secure for you when you need a loan. Request it. One bank for you, one bank for me. So chill and enjoy the ride. Stop the current account on it. One bank.
One Bank by Sterling. Open a current account and start transacting.